In 1878, a single battle would drown the earth in blood, destroy alliances, and ignite a war that would rage for 16 years. What if I told you that before the world knew of the Great Kiriji War, the longest civil war in African history, there was another struggle, fierce and bloody, a turning point so decisive it set Yorubaland on fire for 16 long years. This is the story of Jalumi, a name that means to drown in water. The Battle of Ikirun was more than a fight for a town. Picture it. The year is 1878. The drums of war echo across the land. Ikirun, a small but proud town in Osun, becomes the crucible of destiny. Ibadan's power, unchallenged for decades, is suddenly tested. The Akiti Parapo Confederacy, weary of Ibadan's dominance, raises its banners. Alliances shift like shadows. Betrayal lurks in every council. And the clash of steel will decide more than territory. It will decide the soul of a nation. Here, in Jalumi, Yoruba warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, some to preserve the empire, others to break free. Muskets fired, swords clashed, rivers ran red. The casualties were so overwhelming that the land was said to have swallowed men like the sea. And yet, despite its scale, despite its consequence, this story has been buried, hidden beneath centuries of erased African history. But today, we bring it back. We walk into the smoke and blood of Ikirun. We trace the steps of generals and hunters, and we see how Jalumi became the road to Kiriji. The story of the Jalumi War begins now. The Yoruba people, one of Africa's great civilizations, had seen centuries of glory before this darkness fell. From the empire of Oyo to the kingdoms of Ife, Ijebu, Ijesha, and Ekiti, Yorubaland thrived with trade, art, and learning. But the 19th century was a time of storms. The collapse of the Oyo Empire in the early 1800s left a vacuum. Without Oyo's cavalry to keep order, the land splintered. Rival towns and kingdoms rose against each other. These were the Yoruba civil wars. Decades of chaos in which neighbor fought neighbor. In this chaos, one city rose to prominence, Ibadan. Founded by refugees and warriors in the 1820s, Ibadan became a military powerhouse. Its generals, Ariona Konfolatasisa, Balogun Ogboriefon, and others, expanded its reach through discipline and sheer force of arms. Ibadan became both protector and conqueror, crushing enemies, but also defending Yoruba lands from northern incursions. But Ibadan's dominance came at a price. Other Yoruba states, especially the Ekiti and Ijesha, grew weary of its overlordship. The Ibadan versus Ekiti rivalry became bitter. Tribute demands, forced levies, and military interference turned resentment into rebellion. And looming over all these rivalries was Ilorin. Once a Yoruba town, Ilorin had fallen under the sway of the Fulani Jihad. By 1824, it had become an emirate under the Sokoto Caliphate. Ilorin's warriors, fierce cavalrymen, raided deep into Yoruba country. Their hooves pounded into Offa, Igbona, and beyond. For Ibadan, Ilorin was a constant northern menace. For Ekiti and Ijesha, Ilorin was both a threat and a potential ally. And for every Yoruba town caught in between, Ilorin was the shadow of betrayal, the reminder that even kin could turn against kin. Meanwhile, far away in the Atlantic, new powers cast their eyes on Yorubaland. The British had taken Lagos in 1861, gradually tightening their grip. Their intervention in Africa was only beginning. For now, they watched, traded, and occasionally mediated. But soon, the scramble for Africa would arrive. This was the backdrop: a fractured land, a rising imperial threat, and Yoruba warriors trapped in an endless cycle of wars. A Yoruba proverb says, when the fire has not burned out behind the hill, you cannot say where the flames will end. The fire of conflict had not burned out, but it was spreading. And Ikirun was about to feel its heat. The road to Jalumi was paved with betrayal in Yoruba history. And so, in one of the darkest ironies of Yoruba history, Ekiti and Ijesha turned to Ilorin. Their message was stark: join us. Together we can break Ibadan's chains. The Emir of Ilorin listened. His horsemen had long dreamed of pressing further south, of carving new conquests in the heart of Yorubaland. The invitation from the Ekiti was irresistible, a door flung open by their desperation. He agreed, and with that decision, the stage was set for one of the bloodiest collisions in Yoruba history. From the north, Ilorin's cavalry would descend, their horses armored, their riders clad in flowing robes, muskets and lances glinting in the sun. From the east, the Ekiti and Ijesha would march in solidarity, their war songs carried by the wind. And in the center of their design stood Ikirun. Ikirun was no ordinary town. Its position was a gateway, a vital artery that connected Ibadan to the east. Whoever held Ikirun could choke Ibadan's reach or open the road for rebellion. It was here that the enemies of Ibadan chose to strike, believing that if Ikirun fell, Ibadan's grasp over Yorubaland would crumble like clay in the rain. When the news reached Ibadan, the war council gathered. The generals knew that the fall of Ikirun would spell disaster. The rebellion would spread like wildfire, and Ibadan's years of dominance would end in humiliation. At that council, eyes turned toward a man whose very name was a weapon: Balogun Ogboriefon. He was a warrior forged in countless campaigns, a commander of rare brilliance, a man whose presence on the battlefield could turn panic into discipline. His enemies called him ruthless. His soldiers called him father. To Ibadan, he was the blade upon which their future rested. Ogboriefon accepted the charge without hesitation. He would defend Ikirun not only for its own sake, but for the survival of Ibadan's empire. Thus, as the dry season deepened, armies began to move. From the north, Ilorin's cavalry thundered southward, their banners snapping in the wind. From the east, the Ekiti Parapo advanced, hunters and warriors marching with charms tied to their arms, invoking Ogun, the god of iron. From Ibadan, Ogboriefon's columns marched with grim determination, their drums pounding like the heartbeat of war. And within Ikirun itself, the people prepared as best they could. They tied white chalk to their brows, prayed to their orisa, and whispered to one another the old proverb: "He who marches to war must not be ignorant of death." The air grew heavy with dread and anticipation. The soil of Ikirun seemed to tremble, as though it too knew that its fields would soon drink blood. Men sharpened their cutlasses and loaded their muskets. Women carried food and water to the walls, knowing many would not return. The storm had gathered, and there was no turning back. The Jalumi War will begin. By now, alliances were no longer whispered, they were declared. On one side stood the Eastern Coalition, the warriors of Ekiti, the proud Ijesha, the fierce men of Ila, and their allies from Iyan. Commanders rose to lead this cause. Prince Fabunmi of Okemesi, the fiery spark of the Ekiti revolt. Prince Adeloju of Ila, remembered in some traditions as Adale, a man driven by vengeance and pride. Onmodede and Ayimoro of the Ijesha, whose followers swore to die before yielding, and even Ajia, a cavalry general from Ilorin, whose horses struck fear across the plains. Together, they formed the beating heart of the Ekiti Parapo rebellion. Facing them was the war machine of Ibadan. Their allies included Ikirun, Inisa, and Offa, though Offa, wary of Ilorin more than loyal to Ibadan, held back from confrontation. At the head of Ibadan's forces stood Balogun Ogboriefon, a commander whose name alone made enemies pause. He was no ordinary general. He was a man whose strength was matched by cunning, a warrior who fought with his head as much as with his blade. Yet even within Ibadan, cracks showed. The supreme war leader, R.A. Latosisa, had made a controversial decision. He appointed a co-commander, O.C. Ilorin, to share power with Ogboriefon. Some said O.C. was too proud, too inexperienced, and that this choice would cost Ibadan dearly. In mid-1878, the Eastern Coalition made their move. From the ridges, their camps sprang up like wildfire. From the rivers to the farms, Ikirun was surrounded. No food could enter. No message could escape. Inside, men sharpened their cutlasses. Women whispered desperate prayers, and children clung to their mothers' wrappers. Every dawn, the siege grew tighter. Ikirun was a bird in a hunter's net. Messengers were sent in secret, risking death at every step, carrying pleas to Ibadan. "Save us, or Ikirun will fall." But fate was cruel. Ibadan's main army was far away, campaigning near Mekko and Ketu, at the edge of modern Ogun state. The rebels knew this. Their plan was swift and merciless: take Ikirun before Ibadan returned. Yet even as the alliance dug in, Ibadan's war drums began to echo in the distance. From the forests through flooded valleys, Balogun Ogboriefon was marching back. His men trudged through swollen rivers and muddy roads. The rainy season had turned paths into torrents. The Tin and Oba rivers roared against them, swallowing warriors whole. Some drowned beneath the weight of their weapons, others were swept away screaming. Still, Ogboriefon pressed on. To stop was to betray Ikirun. Destiny cannot be left to chance. By late October, Ikirun was in a state of collapse. Arrows flew over its roofs, skirmishes sparked daily, and hunger gnawed at the people. Then, on October 31st, salvation came. Out of the forest, battered but unbroken, Ibadan's army emerged. Ogboriefon stood at their head, mud clinging to his feet, rainwater dripping from his clothes, but fire alive in his eyes. He studied the rebel lines, spoke calmly with the defenders, and prepared for the reckoning to come. Dawn of November 1st, 1878. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the steady beat of war drums. The alliance had waited long enough. They launched their assault. From the northeast, Ajia's Ilorin cavalry thundered forward, their horses trampling farmland into dust. From the east, Aunmoded and Aimoro led Ijesa warriors in a furious charge from their camp at Iba village. And from the hills, the Akiti and Ila fighters, under Fabunmi and Prince Adeloju, surged down in a sweeping flank. Ikirun shook. Inside, fear spread like fire. Defenders clutched spears, women huddled in corners. The town itself seemed to cry out. Ogboriefon divided his forces swiftly. He took command of the eastern front against the Ijesa, leaving Osi to hold the line against the Ilorin horsemen and the Akiti Ila flanks. But pride can undo even the bravest. Osi faltered. The Ilorin cavalry outmaneuvered him, their horses slicing through his ranks like knives through palm leaves. His men broke. He was captured alive, dragged off as prisoners, jeered. When news reached the camp, panic spread. Osi has fallen. But Ogboriefon did not tremble. He tightened his grip on his sword and roared, "A child of the Yoruba does not fear war." Then he struck. The eastern fields erupted in fury. Ogboriefon led his warriors into the teeth of the Ejesa assault. Spears clashed, muskets cracked, men screamed. Step by step, he pushed them back. The camp of Unmode and Aimoro fell in flames. By noon, the Ejesa flank was broken. But there was no time for rest. The Ilorin cavalry was closing in. Ogboriefon wheeled his men around, charging headlong into Ajia's horsemen. Mud sucked at hooves, muskets fired into the chaos, and men drowned in blood and water. But Ilorin could not withstand him. Their lines shattered. Their riders fled. Before retreating, they executed Osi, a cruel end to Ibadan's co-commander. Now only Fabunmi and Adeloju's forces remained. With their allies crushed, their morale crumbled. By afternoon, the Akiti and Ila broke ranks, their weapons scattered as they fled toward Inisa. The siege was over. Ikirun had been saved. But fate had one final cruelty. As the rebels fled north, thousands strong, they met the swollen Otin River. Behind them, Ibadan's blades pressed close. Before them, the bridge had been destroyed, deliberately cut down by the people of Offa to halt Ilorin's advance. Panic consumed the retreating army. Men leapt into the raging water. Horses bucked and vanished. Spears floated like driftwood. The river became a graveyard. Thousands drowned in its furious waves. What swords had spared, the river claimed. From that day, the name was sealed. Jalumi, they drowned in the river. The river carried away more than men. It carried away the hopes of the Eastern Alliance. Survivors were few, scattered, broken. Ikirun was safe. Ibadan had won. But victory came not with cheers, only silence, the kind left when rivers swallow screams. Yet, as the proverb warns, even if today seems victorious, tomorrow waits with its own challenge. The Jalumi War was over, but the flames of the Kiriji War had only begun to burn. This is not just a tale of Ibadan versus Akiti, or Ikirun versus Ilorin. It is the story of how a people tore themselves apart, even as the storm of colonialism gathered on the horizon. It is the story of forgotten African heroes, of erased African history, and of the revolutions that might have been. And so I ask you, if one forgotten battle like Jalumi could drown a valley in blood and ignite a war that raged for 16 years, how many other battles lie buried beneath silence? How many erased African revolutions wait to be remembered? The Kiriji War is next. A war of drums, of oaths sworn in caves, of warriors who refused to bow. Stay with me, for the story has only just begun. If you liked this video, watch others about the Yoruba civil wars on the channel.